Welcome back to A Kitsune's Tale. Please like, subscribe, and comment. Any and all feedback is welcome. Chapter 8. Journey. We traveled until well after dark before we camped for the night. Kern's men set up a perimeter around the wagons, while Shirohei ordered her pride to rest. Being this close to the Alliance capital, there was little need for them to tire themselves out on guard duty. I ate dinner with Pasha and Seiro next to my wagon. We weren't up long before Seiro suggested we get some rest for the journey ahead. We met a mixed patrol the next afternoon, shortly after midday. Kern spoke briefly with their leader before we continued. The rest of the day was much the same as the previous one, and each day after that felt like a repeat. We didn't encounter any other patrols. On the 6th day, we came upon a village comprised mostly of Lowenmensch and a few Huli-Jing. We decided to stop for the night and rest somewhere other than the wagons. Shirohei left 2 of her guards to accompany the other half-dozen palace guards. The teams Pasha called Feishao were stabled behind the inn and attended to by the innkeeper's son. We were greeted the next morning by a heavy downpour. The guards and drivers moved around in heavy brown cloaks, sealed against rain by an oily substance that made the rain bounce off harmlessly. Shirohei met me by my wagon before we moved out. "We be nearing border soon. 2-3 days most," she said, moving on without waiting for my reply. True to her prediction, Kern stopped us near a bridge crossing a huge river 2 days out from the village. He announced that we had gone as far as he could go. "I wish you luck, Lady Kara. Once you take the ferry across the river, you will be off Alliance lands and on your own." I thanked him graciously for his help. Kern made a non-committal noise before ordering his warriors to head home. Shirohei inspected the ferry before the wagons were boarded. Due to the size of the craft, only 2 of the wagons would fit. It would have to be returned for Pasha and her team. Only Shiroli was left with Pasha as a token guard. I was the one who had hired the pack to guard me, so they stayed with me and Seiro. The ferry made the 2 trips without incident, and we found another lone inn a couple of leagues away. The innkeeper was the biggest Huli-Jing I had ever seen. The proprietor spoke with Seiro at length while Pasha and I, accompanied by Shirohei and her daughter, found an empty table at the back of the room near the kitchen. Shirohei insisted on sitting with her back to the wall where she could keep an eye on the room. There were 2 Kitsune, a Huli-Jing, and a Bakaneko at the inn as well. Shirohei kept a particularly close eye on the 2 Kitsune who kept glancing in our direction. Keiro joined us once dinner was served. The old Huli-Jing sat carefully in the chair, which was made like most others, with a weaved seat and a half-moon back to comfortably fit a tail. "Word has already spread of a 5-tail traveling from the Alliance meeting our description," he said. "We must be diligent during this leg of the journey." Pasha asked Shirohei what she thought of the situation. "If we be attacked, it be at Furlough Pass. 2-day ride," she whispered. "I think we need to rest a half-day ride before we reach Furlough. If we be attacked, we be prepared." She then whispered something in Shirolei's ear, and the youth left the inn. "Shirley and Corsa go ahead to scout. We meet a league out of Furlough. We be watched," she commented. I started to turn for a look, but a low growl from Shirohei stopped me. "They not know we know. You not watch. I watch." We ate in silence. Once we were done, we went back to our wagons to sleep on Shirohei's urging. I lay awake listening to the crickets chirping outside my wagon. The night otherwise passed without incident. I was woken by a discreet knock on my door. When I asked who it was, one of the guards responded, "Captain want tell Kitsune go early. They go Furlough by trail." I didn't bother to respond, but just lay back down on my pallet of blankets. I lay there staring at the ceiling of my wagon in peace. A short time later, it lurched into motion. I wasn't in the mood to sit with the driver today, so I spent the entire day contemplating what I would do if we reached Seiro's village. What would happen if we did? Kano had given me enough gold to make the same trip tenfold, but it would only last so long before I would have to find a way to make my own. I toyed with the idea of becoming a merchant like Pasha, but dismissed it immediately. The cold reality descended upon me that I knew nothing about where I was going. The whole time I had been in this world, Kano had supplied everything I wanted. Maybe I could become a mercenary like Shirohi. I was caught up in my musing about what it would be like to be a fighter when one side of my wagon dropped suddenly. The unexpected motion tossed me against the hard wood of the wall, and I hit my head hard. Outside, I could hear a string of words I had never heard before coming from the driver. The wagon skidded along for a moment before the driver could halt the team. I regained my senses and slid open a side window to see what had happened. "My apologies, lady. We have broken a wheel," the driver said. I slid the door closed and climbed out the back of the wagon to see for myself. The driver knelt beside the wagon, inspecting the damage unhappily. The other drivers walked up to assist him in the repair. Shirohi shouted orders for her pride to set up defensive positions. She looked over to where my wagon was being lifted into the air with a long pole and a log as a fulcrum. Lacking anything to do, I went back to Pasha's wagon. She sat in the driver's seat watching the progress from her vantage point. I climbed up onto the bench beside her. "What do you think?" I asked. "About what?" Pasha continued to watch the progress without looking at me. "What Shirohi said about furlough?" Pasha didn't respond. I wasn't satisfied and pressed the issue. One of her prides stopped by my wagon before we left the inn, said the Kitsune from the inn had left ahead of us down the same trail. Pasha took a deep breath and sighed. "Don't worry so much. I have known Shirohi most of my life. She knows her job well." We were met the next day by Corsa. She stepped out of the tree line next to Seiro's wagon. I had been watching the road ahead intently and hadn't even noticed her until she crossed the road. Shirohi ordered the wagons to stop while she talked with Corsa. Corsa kept pointing down the road and up toward the rising mountain. I could tell Shirohi wasn't happy with the report by the way she kept shaking her head. Both turned and headed for my wagon. I jumped down to intercept them. Shirohi waited until both Kiro and Pasha joined us before giving her report. "Corsa say 4 Kitsune wait. There be 3 two-tailed and a 4-tail positioned atop pass. 2 are from inn, by telling. It not be safe take wagon. They wait drop rock on us." Shirohi let the news sink in before continuing. "We need deal with before go more. Think need wait here. Allow us fix." "Can we help?" asked Seiro. Shirohi shook her head, no. "This be Lowenfrau job. We fix. We no fix. You find another way." Even though nobody liked the idea, we pulled the wagons off to the side of the road to wait. I, along with the rest of my party, hovered around Seiro's wagon in anticipation of Shirohi's return. She had taken her entire pride up into the mountain to deal with the 4 Kitsune. I spent my time throwing rocks into the bushes while Pasha and Seiro discussed what to do if our escort failed. Hours ticked by slowly. I found myself jumping at every sound. The weight was beginning to take its toll on me. Even Pasha looked to be getting worried. I was about to suggest we go look for the pride when Shirohi staggered out of the tree line. All of us ran for her. Pasha was the first to reach her and helped her to Keiro's wagon. "Shirohi say bring wagons. Most Kitsune die 4-tail run," Shirohi panted. The wagons began moving once Shirohi and Seiro were in his wagon. Pasha took control of her own wagon while her driver stayed to attend to the wounded Lowenfrau. It wasn't long before we came upon signs of fighting. We first spotted a Kitsune lying face down next to the road in a ditch. A mile into the pass, we came across Shirohi and her pride kneeling over a body. Once the wagons had stopped, Shirohi left her pride to greet us. Her report was the same as her daughter's, except she informed us that one of her pride mates was gravely injured. I ordered my driver to move all my belongings to the other 2 wagons. All 3 drivers worked to follow my orders. The Lowenfrau they brought over wasn't much older than Shirohi and was bleeding heavily from the mouth and ears. I joined the injured guard, along with Shirohi, in the back of my wagon. I watched as Shirohi examined her pride mate solemnly. She did her best to clean up the wounds and wipe off as much blood as she could, but in the end, all she could do was try and make her pride mate, Sarofa, comfortable. Sarofa continued to cough up blood throughout the evening. I couldn't take it any longer. I leaned over and put my face in my hands to hide my tears. I cried for a while until a hand grabbed my leg. I looked down to find Sarofa looking up at me. She attempted a smile and shook her head no. Sarofa said something in a language I couldn't understand between fits of coughing. Shiroli translated for her friend. Sarofa say no cry, she die with honor. I didn't take my eyes off Sarofa. I wanted her to know how grateful I was for her service. She was dying because of my decision not to return to my world. Tell her that it is an honor to know her and to be at her side now. I will see to it her family knows of her great honor personally. Shirley hesitated but did as asked. Sarofa reached up with her bloody hand to me, and I took it in my own. The contact seemed to stir something within me. I locked eyes with the dying Lowenfrau, and the world began to fade away. When everything came back into focus, I sat face to face with the fox spirit from my trials. We were still in the wagon, but only the dying mercenary and the fox remained. I could feel something tugging at my insides, trying to pull my soul free. You are joined with this creature in death. Live or die. Somehow I knew I had stumbled upon my trial, but I didn't know how. I knew without a doubt I would die if I did nothing. I tried to let go of Sarofa without success. Her hand was locked in a death grip. She stared up at me through vacant eyes. I don't know what to do. I don't want to die with her. I pleaded for answers from the fox spirit, but it just sat there waiting. My soul continued to be pulled from my body painfully. To my horror, blood began to fill my throat, causing me to cough uncontrollably. The pain I felt throughout my body left my mind numb. A part of me would do anything to stop the pain. Even death became a preferable option to the torment I felt. A spasm in my abdominal muscles caused me to double over, vomiting blood. It spilled everywhere. I was terrified at the sight. I had never seen so much in my life. I lay there gasping to breathe through bouts of coughing. I only wished it to end. I couldn't understand how anyone could endure the pain that racked my body. I struggled to find a way to end the pain. I turned my mind inward, trying to figure out what was happening to me. I imagined I was searching for anything broken. I searched frantically until I could see a river of blood filling my abdomen from a great artery. I reached out to push it back into place. I only succeeded in slowing the flow of blood, but it leaked around the edges of the broken artery. I closed my eyes, thinking it needed to be sealed. I opened them when I no longer heard the splash of blood. I held a whole artery in my hands. I resumed my search. I eventually came across a long canal of bone. It was splintered in many directions. I could see water leaking out in several places between the sections of the canal. Again, I placed my hands over the leaks to try and hold in the water. The leaking slowed and finally stopped. I then imagined the shattered pieces as a whole, using a complete section as a reference to how it should be. The pull on my soul was beginning to lessen. I could feel it returning to my body. The more I worked to fix all the things that were broken, the weaker I felt. I didn't think I could continue much longer. I followed the canal through her body. I could see another crack where water trickled down from a wall. I made my way to inspect the slow escape of water thoughtfully. It looked similar to the canal, except for something behind the wall was pushing against it. I could almost make out traces of red mixed with the water. Further inspection revealed the blood leaking from another vessel behind the wall. There was no way to close the fissure without removing the mounting blood behind it. I wormed my way closer to the vessel until I could just touch it with my fingertips. I sealed the vessel as best I could, and after a long search, found an opening to which I coaxed the blood. That was completed, I began work on the fissure. It was almost closed when I started to feel dizzy and fought to remain conscious until the water had stopped flowing through the small crack. The last thing I remembered before losing consciousness was the fox spirit telling me of a storm coming. I woke to total darkness. I moaned as every bone in my body hurt, including my head. I lay there listening to my pulse pound in my ears. Am I dead? I asked the darkness. Somewhere in the darkness, I could hear something scuffling across what sounded like wood. You be with living. I thought I recognized the rough voice. You no move, I get Huli Jing. Again, the scuffling, followed by a burst of light that sent waves of pain through my eyes. I reflexively moved my arm to cover them. The pain was so intense it sent waves of nausea through me. I tried to sit up and scramble toward the direction the light had come from. I hadn't gotten far when the ground disappeared, and I spilled out the back of the wagon to land hard on my back. The force of the impact knocked the breath out of me at the same time as I vomited. I gasped for breath and choked on the bile. I tried to roll onto my side with limited success, but enough, so I was able to spit out the rising contents of my stomach. Kara, help me roll her on her side. I recognized Pasha's voice immediately. Look at the blood, interjected Kairo's voice worriedly. Sarofa, do same. The raspy voice was unmistakably Sherohi's. I continued to expel the contents of my stomach until I lay dry heaving. I struggled to roll onto my stomach and push myself up. My muscles were weak and my arms shook, but I managed to right myself and leaned over with my hands on my knees. I think I'll be all right. What happened? I gasped between heaves. Shirohei told me what Shiroli had described. Apparently, I had collapsed unconscious on top of Sarofa. According to the description, I had begun showing the same signs as the injured Lowenfrau. They found me bleeding from the mouth and ears, just as Sarofa had done. I struggled to my feet with the help of Shirohi and Pasha. It took my eyes a few minutes to adjust to the afternoon sun. Once I was able to see, I looked back at the empty wagon. Where is Serapha? I hear, Heilmittel. Sarofa limped over from the front of the wagon. Her right leg and arm were both splinted with pieces of wood. The hair around her face was matted and her eyes appeared swollen, but otherwise she looked whole and alive. I stared at the Lowenfrau in shock. I had thought she was dead by now. Surely her injuries were enough to kill her. The last thing I remembered of Sarofa was her lying there, barely able to breathe. It is good to see you alive. But how? Sarofa listened to Shirohi say something in a language I couldn't understand. Apparently, Sarofa spoke very little English and required someone to translate for her. Shirohi nodded her head and translated for me. She say you be in her dream. Say you watch over. You heal her. She feel it. I was stunned. Feishan had told me I would be able to heal minor wounds, but I hadn't realized I was doing so when I was fighting for my life. I leaned onto the wagon to keep my balance. Inside, I could see the entire floor covered in blood and sand. Meet me in the blood-red sand, I whispered to myself. I hadn't noticed it before, but I had unwittingly participated in the rite of passage. The realization was a shock to me. Had this been what happened to my grandmother so long ago? Had she failed to heal someone and thus nearly died from the victim's injuries?
Thank you for joining us for another edition of A Kitsune's Tale. We hope you will return for more.